Right. I just had to find that
Oh,
button, and now I can share again. All right. So we're in Parshat Toldot, and I call this crisis management. A little different from what we've done so far. We're going to look at three different characters in the Parsha response to what seems to be crises and how they deal with it. Obviously, some will deal with it better than others.
we're not seeing your screen share.
Oh, you're not?
Well,
No.
we actually are, but we
Well,
are, but we're not seeing the documents. All we're seeing is some Zoom.
It's an ad for need resources on using Zoom. You have
That's because I have the wrong screen being shared.
Okay.
All right, is that better?
Yeah,
All right, let me zoom in.
that's it.
And
Here's Shapiro's.
okay, so our first crisis is actually there's perhaps two crises which are encountered, experienced by Asa. At the very beginning of the parsha, we have the scene where, so the very beginning is the birth of the twins and the pregnancy of the twins, but immediately after that we have the scene where Yaakov steals or buys or bargains or tricks Esav into selling him the Bechorah, the birthright. And it's very interesting to delve a little into the Midrashic tradition on what was going on here. We might have discussed this. I might have spoken about this at some point in the shul. But it's a fascinating turn of events that we see in the Midrashim once we get past the story. So the Torah tells us Esav comes in and he sees that Yaakov is making this nazid, this stew. Vayomer Esav el Yaakov, haliteni namin hadom hazeh ki ayef anochi. Esav says, please give me some of this red stew. I'm very tired. Al ken karashmo Edom. Therefore his name is Edom. Vayomer Yaakov michrach hayom et bechorat chali. Yaakov says, sell me your birthright. Vayomer Esav hinei anochi olech lamut v'lama ze li bechorah. Esav says, I'm going to die. What do I care about the birthright? Vayomer Yaakov hishav ali kayom v'hishav alo vayimkor bechorto Yaakov. Yaakov says, swear to me that you'll do this, and he makes a swear, makes an oath, and he sells his birthright to Yaakov. Yaakov natan le'esav lechem nazir adashim vayochal vayesh vayakam vayelech vayivaz Esav et habechorah. Yaakov gives to Esav bread and the stew and the lentils or the beans. He eats and he drinks and he gets up and he goes. Vayivaz Esav et habechorah. Esav spurned or somehow disparaged the birthright. So what exactly is it that causes Esav to be willing to depart, to sell the birthright, to depart with something that seemingly is so meaningful and so special? Any thoughts or ideas on why he's so willing to part with it?
Well, one possibility is to take what he says literally, that he really thought he was dying.
Okay, so right, it could be that he's really famished and starving to death, and there really is no point to the birthright if you're not going to make it past today. And that certainly is one possibility. Although we'll see in a moment, the Midrash takes it in a very different way.
It could be that he didn't take it very seriously and he'd rather have something to eat and give it up if that's
right. So that's the most common understanding, is that he gave no consideration to the spiritual, to the long-term benefits of whatever the Bechorah would grant him, that he was much more focused on the here and the now. That's certainly the most conventional understanding. So to start the underlying story I want to go into is the Gemara in Bava Batra. It's actually speaking about a pasuk that we explored a little bit last week with Abraham, where we read that Hashem berach et Avraham bakol, that God blessed Abraham with everything. So the Gemara wants to know, what is bakol? What is the everything Someone has an echo.
Oh, yeah, that's me. Sorry.
Okay, no problem. Thanks. What is the everything that Abraham was blessed with? So the Gemara offers the explanation, the possibility. Still hearing an echo from someone. Robert, is that you? Hello? All right, that did it. The Gemara says that what is the blessing that Abraham was given by God? Shalom arad Esav biyamav. The blessing is that Esav did not rebel as long as Abraham was alive. And that's one possibility. Devar acher, another possibility. Sha'asa Ishmael tshuva biyamav. That Ishmael did tshuva, did repentance in his lifetime. We saw some of that unpacked by Rabbi Sachs in last week's shiur. So how do we know that Esav did not rebel in Abraham's lifetime? Shalom arad Esav biyamav minalan. Ichtiv vayavo Esav min hasedeh v'hayef. The puzzle we just saw, that Esav came in from the field and he was tired. Vitana, it's taught in a Breita. Oto hayom niftar Avraham Avinu. On that very day when Esav comes in tired from the field and sells his birthright to Yaakov, is the same day that Abraham died. Ve'asa Yaakov Avinu tavshil shel adashim lenachim et Yitzchak aviv. Yaakov made this stew of lentils to comfort Yitzchak. Gemara goes into some side discussion about why specifically a stew of lentils, and what the proper food for mourning is. And this is the source for the custom that we have for eating eggs, but we're not going to focus on that right now. But bonus reading if anyone wants to look at those lines that we're going to skip over. Then the Gemara picks up a few lines further down. Amar Rav Yochanan, Chamesh averot avar oto rasha b'oto hayom. On that same day that Abraham died, Esav committed 5 cardinal sins. What did he do? Ba'al nara me'ursa, harag et hanefesh, ki kafar ba'ikar, kafar b'tchiyat hametim, v'shat et habechora. He had illicit sexual relations with a married or betrothed woman. He killed someone. He denied God. He denied the possibility or the idea of tchiyat hametim, resurrection of the dead, and he scorned or he somehow disgraced the birthright. So the Gemara is very harsh on Esav here, right? That he did all these things. But the remarkable thing is the Gemara says he only did it once Abraham was no longer living. Why would he wait? Why would he commit these sins on the day that Abraham died? Any ideas on that?
He was afraid of his grandfather.
Jewish guilt, right? That as long as Abraham was alive, he had a desire to commit all these sins, but he knew that it would not go over well. He had too much respect for his grandfather. So now that his grandfather's dead, he can finally play out all the rebellion that he had plotted to do for so long. Right? That's how I take it too, Gary. Any other takes on it?
Either that or the Midrash is giving him a knifing job.
It's giving him a...
The Midrash might be knifing him.
Okay. So interestingly, though, in the Midrash Rabbah number 3, it takes it the opposite way. The Midrash there picks up a little bit later in the conversation between Yaakov and Esav. Vayazed Yaakov nazid. Esav sees that he's preparing this lentil stew. Amarlo, Esav says to Yaakov, Matzivo shel nazid zeh. Why are you making this stew? Amarlo shemeto tozakein. So Yaakov tells him, our grandfather died, and I'm preparing it as a food of mourning. Amar, oto hazakein pag'a midat hadin, Marlo hin. Esav says, really? Our grandfather Abraham was struck by the midat hadin, by the attribute of justice. He succumbed to death. And Yaakov says yes. Amar im kain matan sachar lo matan sachar v'lo tchiyat hametim. Esav says if that's the case, then there is no reward and there is no resurrection of the dead. Ruach hakodesh tzovachat al tivku lamet ve'al tagudu lo. Abraham, and the Ruach HaKodesh, a divine spirit, somehow said in relation to Esav's statement, quoting the pasuk from Yirmiyahu, do not cry for the dead and do not lament for them. That refers to Abraham, but rather cry for the one who is going. This refers to Esav. What's going on in this midrash? Why does Esav, according to this, why does Esav sell the birthright?
Well, clearly he thought that somebody as righteous as Abraham should be exempt from death.
Right. So it's not that he was harboring all these rebellious thoughts for years and years and years and was waiting till Abraham died to play it out, but that, right, Abraham's death creates a crisis of faith. Esav assumed that Abraham was not subject to the normal rules of living and dying, that Abraham was the pure tzaddik, and that as the pure tzaddik, Abraham would live forever. But now that Abraham is dead, there's no hope for the rest of us. That seems to be what Esav is saying. And so Esav commits the sins because he doesn't see any point in continuing to live the lifestyle that Abraham had tried to impart to him. So it creates for him a crisis of faith, right? And it's very interesting because we always think of Esav as being the bad guy. But Midrash here tells us that we should actually be crying for Esav, that it's tragic that he had this warped view of the world in which he thought that Abraham would not succumb to death, and therefore we should be empathetic and sympathetic to him, rather than seeing him as the Rasha, as the one who didn't give any thought or consideration to what we know to be such a precious gift as the Bechor, as the birthright that he was entitled to. Right, so Aviva Zernberg spells this out, our reading of the Midrash. For Esav, Avraham had been the test case for meaning and absurdity. If he too is subject to the fatality of death, then Esav abandons all belief in an ultimately intelligible reality. Right? That it doesn't make sense to him that Abraham would die. It doesn't make sense with his worldview, and therefore he abandons everything. This idea, this theme with Esav continues a bit later in the parsha. We see right before the story with Yitzchak giving the birthright, right, with Yaakov dressing up and fooling his father, dressing like Esav. The thing that introduces that is the following pasuk in number 5. Vay Esav ben 40 shana vayikach ishat Yehudit bat ve'eli hachiti ve'dosmat bat Elon hachiti. So we're told that Esav takes 2 wives, these 2 women, who are both Chitite women. Vatiena morat ruach leYitzchak u'leRivka. They were a source of bitterness for his parents. Esav takes 2 wives, and these wives are a source of bitterness and depressed spirit for his parents. Why would that be the case? So Rashi tells us, kind of continuing with more of the read of the Gemara than the Midrash. Rashi tells us, Esav hayanim shal lechazir. Esav is compared to a pig or to a boar. How so? Hachazir hazeh keshu shochev poshet tzlafav lomar ve'ush ani tahor. Kach elu gozlim v'chomsim umarim atzmam kesherim. Right? What does a pig do? A pig, if you're looking at it from a distance or from certain angles, looks like a kosher animal. It can hide its hoof, and it looks, if you're just looking from the top, like it has a split hoof and is tahor, is kosher. So it hides its sign of tumah, of impurity. So to Esav, he pretended, right? He made himself out to be such a righteous guy, and he really wasn't. How so? Kol mem shana haya Esav sad nashim mitachat ba'alehen ume'aneh otam. Right? He says that he was 40 when he married these 2 women. So for the first 40 years, or however, from whenever he became an adult, from age 15 or whatever till 40, he would secretly have illicit relations with lots of different women. Shaya ben Mem Amar Abba ben Mem ben Arbaim Shana Nasa Isha Afanichin. Said of the reason he didn't get married till he was 40 is because that's the age that Yitzchak got married at. So he tried to make himself to be just like his father, but really he was such a bad guy. Okay, so that's one explanation for why, and I guess the Rashi is implying that eventually his parents were onto him, and they figured out that he wasn't such a tzaddik after all. Maybe because he took 2 wives. Unclear exactly how they knew, but somehow Rashi is intimating that they knew that Esav had been tricking them or trying to trick them for all these years. The Rashbam says also not very flatteringly of Esav, and I think this English translation is not a great translation. The Sefaria site just automatically populated it, and I realized afterwards I think this is footnotes, not the actual translation. But the Rashbam writes, "Vayi Esav ben Arba'im shana," he was 40. Lo chashash Yitzchak lahasilo ulachiv nashim hagunot. Up until the age of 40, Yitzchak never thought to marry them off to proper girls. Vayikach ishat Yehudit bat ve'evi achiti. He took this woman as his wife. Lo hikpid Yitzchak on nisuei hachitiot kemo she'asa aviv. Right, Abraham did not allow the servants to take a Hittite woman for Yitzchak, but Yitzchak wasn't so strict with Esav. He allowed this marriage to take place, even though Avraham had indicated that it's not proper to marry Hittite women. But Yena Morat Ruach, they were bitter of spirit, they caused distress. Right, because later on, we'll see in the next source, that when Yaakov has to run away, part of the reason why he goes to live with his uncle Lavan, with Rivka's brother, is because Rivka doesn't want him to marry a Hittite woman. So it's sort of showing us that Yaakov got things right and Esav got things wrong. Right, and so here's the psukim that the Rashbam was referring to at the very end of the next parak, after Esav realizes that he's been tricked by Yaakov, and Yaakov was giving his instructions to run away to his uncle, to his family, and escape Esav and find a wife there. We read, I'll pick up in Pasuk Hey, verse 5. Vayishlach Yitzchak et Yaakov vayelech vadena Aram el Lavan ben Betuel Arami achi Rivka im Yaakov ve'Esav. Yitzchak sends Yaakov to go live with Lavan, his uncle, the brother of Rivka. Vayar Esav ki berach Yitzchak et Yaakov vayishalach oto padena Aram lakachat lo misham isha. Esav saw that Yitzchak blessed Yaakov and sent him to Padan Aram to marry a woman there. And that he had told him not to marry a Canaanite woman. Yaakov listens, he follows their orders. Esav sees that the Canaanite women are bad in the eyes of his father. So Esav goes and he takes another wife that he thinks will be more fitting and gain more approval in his father's eyes. He marries his cousin on the other side, Yishmael's daughter, in addition to the wives he had already taken. Right? So the reason I brought this is to show that we already saw that Esav, when he has a crisis, when things don't go right for him, he seems to abandon everything, right? He seems to give up. And I think that there's just an intimation of that in this Torah is focusing on the wives and the nationality of the wives that he takes at the various points in his life, that's another sign of rebellion and that he really is not interested in carrying forth the family tradition.
Well, it's also clear from these psukim, you could read it differently, that Yitzchak never made his wishes known before.
Right. It's certainly
And in
true.
fact, Aviva Zornberg's interpretation is more charitable to Esav, and used more closely to the pshat.
Right. I think that's true. I think that the Midrash and Aviva Zernberg are certainly onto something, and that we can and should see Esav as a sympathetic character. And certainly, you're right. Yitzchak's wishes were never made known to him. We could talk a lot
And
about Yitzchak and Rivka's failures or lack of success as parents, and that's certainly a very real possibility and a very legitimate way of reading it. And we can leave that. We can leave that here. That every character is complicated.
And the other thing that has come up before is that Yitzchak and Rivka played favorites, which is a very bad way
Right.
of parenting.
Right. So that's in their not being good parents, and that could be a topic for next year's shiur. But there's a lot to say about the parenting style, and how that all played into what's going on here. So we'll keep Esav's response to crisis in the back of our mind, and let's explore a little bit what we can see with Yitzchak. So the crisis for Yitzchak is also very interesting in the way that it gets played out. And also we're going to be dependent on the Midrashic tradition here. So we're going to focus in on the story we had just glossed over, which is when Yitzchak wants to bestow the Bechorah, the birthright. What is it that prompts him to give the blessing at this point? So we're in source number 9. Vayiki zakein Yitzchak vatichaena einav meirot. Vayikar et Esav beno hagadol vayomer elav beni vayomer elav hineni. Yitzchak was old, and his eyes had grown dim, and he calls Esav to bless him. Right? So presumably he's blind. He thinks the end is near. What's quite interesting to me, and we don't need to harp on this, but it's quite interesting to note that Yitzchak lives another 22 years. Right? He lives, he doesn't die in source number 10 until after Yaakov has spent all those years with Lavan, marrying 2 wives, building his family, finally returning on his way, encountering Esav. The 2 brothers make up, and just as with Abraham, who was buried, we saw last week, by both children, by Yitzchak and Yishmael, Yitzchak is buried by both of his sons as well. So he doesn't die for another 22 years. So the fact that Yitzchak felt it was time to bestow the Bechorah is a little bit curious. Why does he, blindness is difficult, but blindness does not equal death.
But also, he doesn't seem to know that Esav has sold the Bechorah.
Right. That's a whole other question. Is why, if this was a legitimate sale at the beginning of the parsha, why doesn't Yitzchak know about it? And why does he call Yaakov? Why does he call Esav and not Yaakov? Right. So there's a lot that's been said about that.
Forgive me, but let's go back. First of all, where he says the Bechorah. So one interpretation is that he literally meant, well, let's look at it through Aviva Zornberg's eyes. Basically, he's just had an existential crisis. Mm-hmm. His grandfather died. He said, I'm going to die too. This is all useless. This is not literally that he's physically going to die, okay? Now let's move along, come back really to Yaakov here. Now, Judaism actually thinks very highly of death awareness. Mm-hmm. And it's something that everybody should keep in front of their eyes all the time. And in fact, really most people don't in this world. I'm not talking about Jews, but most people really don't become aware of their own mortality until something happens. Now that's often the death of both, takes the death of a parent or 2 parents, right, for many people to really begin to contemplate it. But another thing, of course, is, the older a person gets, then the more likely it is for a person to realize this is for real, that my parents have died, I'm up next, okay?
Right.
So for somebody to say, he's old, his eyesight is going, well, something, lots of things are going, okay? And so I don't think it the slightest bit strange for him to consider his own mortality and think about preparing for the future and passing on a blessing. In fact, I consider that to be a sign of creeping wisdom.
Okay, it's very, everything you say is very true, and certainly this could be taken as a great jumping off point to talk about death awareness, as you mentioned, Moshe, and to talk about the halachic imperative to have a will, to have a medical directive, right? That could be a very interesting conversation and interesting to think about in terms of Yitzchak. And I agree with you that that's all important. I would also say, though, that it's clear in the Torah that when is a bechora, one of these blessings given, is at the end of a person's life. Right? Now, you could all say back to me, well, no one knows when they're going to die, so that's, it's not a really fair gauge, but it does jump out that Yitzchak gives the bechora, and it's not on his deathbed. It's not as he's dying. So that's the only point I wanted to make there. And I think we can take both. I think you raise legitimate points, but when we see the midrash, then I want to hear what you have to say after we see what the midrash has to say about it. Okay, so when the Torah tells us that Yitzchak is old and his eyes grew dim, the phrase it uses is "Vatichahena einav merot." His eyes grew dim from seeing, or to see, right? Which we conventionally translate as he couldn't see. The midrash tells us, what does it mean merot, to see or from seeing? Mikoach otar re'aya, from the strength of that vision, from having seen something else previously. What is it that he had seen previously? During the Akedah, when Abraham bound Yitzchak on the altar, the angels cried, and it quotes a verse from Yeshayahu to prove it. And the angels' tears fell into Yitzchak's eyes. And they remained in his eyes. The angelic tears remained in Yitzchak's eyes. And when he got old, his eyes dimmed. So it's the angelic tears that caused his blindness, according to this midrash. Moshe likes this. I can see.
No, I would read the midrash a little more. You see, they're talking around it. I would read the whole experience much more explicitly. He was a kid, or at least a young man, depending upon which midrash you read, when he was almost killed by his father. He stared death in the eyes as a young person. And it's in fact, the only young people I've ever met who've ever had a sense of mortality, of their own mortality, are young people who either had a life-threatening illness or a life-threatening accident. And he had that.
Right.
So why should it be surprising that, and besides, my favorite Mishnah is Shuv Yom Echad Lefnei Misatzcha. Well, who but Yitzchak has a better appreciation of that, which he's carried since he was young.
Yeah. In modern psychological terms, I think we could easily diagnose Yitzchak in this midrash as suffering from PTSD, from post-traumatic stress disorder. And right, it's interesting that it doesn't manifest itself until for so many years afterwards, right? But it's clearly the midrash is saying that event is what triggered his blindness later in life.
Let me also say, if we're going to read midrashim about this, there are also midrashim that in fact Abraham did kill Yitzchak, right, and that he was later brought back to life.
Right.
Well, according to that midrash, Yitzchak would be acutely aware that that there's no guarantee that the next breath is going to come, that it could end at any moment, totally unexpectedly, even at the hands of someone you thought you trusted.
Right. So the next midrash, the continuation of the midrash takes it in a slightly different way. Davar acher, so another explanation of merot, of having seen. Also, it says mikorach otah ra'aya, from that same strength or vision that he had previously experienced. which is the Akedah again. B'sha'a she'akad Avram Avinu et Yitzchak ben al gabei mizbeach, tzala einav b'marom v'hibit b'shchina. At the time of the Akedah, Yitzchak looked up to the heavens and he saw the Shekhinah. He saw the divine presence. Moshlim oto mashal lemad davar domeh. And so it's compared to the following. L'melech shaya mitayel b'petach paltin shelo v'tala einav ra b'no shel ohavo meitzitz alav be'ad hachalon. It's like a king who's walking in his palace and he sees his lover's son looking at him through the window. Amar, right, looking at him in an inappropriate way. Amar im hargo ani yachshav machli ani et ohavi. So the king says, if I kill this child now for looking at the king inappropriately or spying on me or whatever this kid is doing, I'm going to cause great pain to my lover. Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu im hargo ani achshav ani machli et Avraham ohavi. So God says, if I kill Yitzchak now, I am going to cause pain to Avraham. Ella gozer ani she'yikehu einav. Rather, I decree that his eyes will become dimmed. The kevan she'izkin kahu einav. And once he got old, his eyes became dim. And that's why we read that Yitzchak was blind. Okay, so what's this midrash telling us about Yitzchak and his blindness?
First of all, Yitzchak is the victim here. It wasn't his idea. The Akedah was not his idea.
Right.
And to
Well,
punish him
definitely not.
again seems like adding insult to injury. This is real injustice.
Okay, I hear that, and I agree with you. Right, but the midrash is telling us that it's a punishment, that he looked inappropriately. Right, whether it means that he had improper thoughts or was upset at Hashem in some way, but that he looked accusingly perhaps towards God, and that is what ultimately results in his blindness, according to this, right? So we could see Yitzchak and Esav as one and the same, right? That they both had a crisis of faith brought about by something external to them. In Yitzchak's case, being bound on the altar, on the Akedah, and all the psychological trauma that he went through. In Esav's case, the reckoning with Abraham's death. But they both have a crisis of faith, an existential crisis, which leads to them, in both cases, Esav rejecting everything, and Yitzchak perhaps withdrawing from the world. Right. That's why I made the point about him living for so long after the blindness afflicted him, that he seems to remove himself and that he's not really we could say that for his whole life. There's a lot that's been written about how everything in his life, he's just passive, he's just doing everything that Abraham did, he's reactive and not proactive, and that might be the results of the experience that he had at the Akedah, and that certainly seems to be what this midrash could be implying. Moshe, you good with this?
Yeah, my reaction to the midrash?
Yeah.
Why is there anything in this midrash that you must take negatively about Yitzchak? There's nothing negative. The negative is it's he looked up, he saw the Shekhinah. Well, you should be so lucky.
Yeah. I had thoughts. I don't know how to connect them quite yet, but it evoked for me the midrash play on Nadav and Avihu also, where we always read that story as a punishment, but God says V'kruvaya Kadesh, that I will be sanctified by those who are near to me, and that in whatever they did on that day in the Mishkan was not appropriate, but that they also might have had some great spiritual experience, right? Some say that it was what they did was they had such a holy spiritual experience that they could no longer live in a physical world. That's one way of taking it. So I think there is a connection here. There's something to play off of. I don't quite have it all figured out yet, but I think there's something there. So the final model of crisis for tonight is Rivka. We go back to the beginning of the parsha, and the Torah tells us, "Vayitro tetzu habanim b'kirba," Vatomer imkein lama ze anochi vatelech lidrosh et Hashem. After many years of struggling with fertility, Rivka finally becomes pregnant, and the children struggle within her. And she says, if this is the case, why am I? And she went to inquire of God, right? And so God tells her, well, you're carrying twins, right? We're all conditioned to read it through the prism of the Midrash brought by Rashi, that whenever she would pass by a house of idolatry, that Esav would struggle to come out. Whenever she passed through the Beit Midrash or somewhere else where God was worshipped, Yaakov would struggle to come out, and she thought that she was carrying one child with a split personality. Right? It would make sense if the kid only wanted to come out when she passed by Avodah Zarah, or only wanted to come out when she passed by Beit Midrash, but this kid wants to come out both instances. So that's why it's a comfort to her to find out that she in fact is carrying twins and not one baby with a split personality. So what is it though that causes her to go and inquire, right? Tomer im kain lama ze anochi. If this is the case, why am I? What exactly is it that troubles Rivka so much? So Rashi tells us, im kain gadol sa'ar ha'ibor. If it is true, if it is such that the pain of pregnancy is so great, lama ze anochi mit'arva mitpalelet al harayon. Why did I want so badly to become pregnant and to have children? Right? This is not what I thought it was going to be. Maybe I was wrong in having such a strong desire to have kids. And that's what Rashi tells. Vatelech lidrosh, she went to inquire of God, lebeit midrasho shel Shem, lidrosh et Hashem, she'agid la ma tehei b'sofa, to inquire of God to find out what would be in the end, right? Why the split personalities that she thought she was carrying. The Ramban does not accept Rashi's reading of it, and the Ramban says that really her question was as follows. So after rejecting Rashi, he quotes the Ibn Ezra. She went and asked other women, did they have similar experiences when they were pregnant? But Tomar no, they said to her no. But Tomer im kain hadavar minhag lama ze anochi beharayon meshuneh. So her question is, why is my pregnancy unusual and different than that of other women? The Ramban thinks there's many holes, textual holes in this explanation. So the Ramban thinks that her question is an existential question. If this is how things are, why am I here, right? I can't make sense of anything. Nothing's like I thought it was going to be. Why was I born? What am I doing here? I wish that I would die. Or that I had never been born in the first place, right? That Rivka is also going through an existential crisis. So we have three such crises in our parsha. And what's fascinating is to see the Gur Aryeh, the Maharal of Prague's take on how Rivka deals with the crisis that she's going through. So the Maharal quotes the Rashi and the Ramban, and he doesn't accept either of them. So he says, Im pirush ze lo nireh, gam pirush ze lo nireh. He rejects Rashi, he rejects the Ramban. How could Rivka say such a thing? Why was she born? Why was she created? God put her in the world. It's not her place to question, right? Well, you could say to the Maharal, well, if someone's having an existential crisis, then they're having that crisis, and they're no longer believing in God, or they're having a hard time. So that's not really such a fair critique of Rivka, but let her have her crisis. Aval nira perusho. Rather, the Maharal says the proper way to read it is, if this is so, why am I? And then there's an ellipse, and he says the ellipse is, why am I sitting doing nothing? Just accepting that things are strange, or things are difficult, or things don't make sense. Why am I not investigating it? All I can do is try to make sense of it. And that's what prompted her, lidrosh et Hashem. That's what prompted her to go and inquire of God. Right? So the way that I had envisioned this, and again, very happy to get pushback on it, but the way that I envisioned it is that where we saw that the crisis of faith of Yitzchak and Esav led them to a passivity and to a rejection of everything, right? What does Rivka's crisis of faith do? It spurs her to inquire more deeply and try to make sense of things. And I realize that's maybe a fairy tale ending when we're talking about such deep things, but that certainly is another model that many might be able to identify with. And I think it's a beautiful read of the Gur Aryeh. Again, he didn't accept the Ramban because he said the Ramban had some textual holes in it. To fill in a whole other sentence that's not there also creates some textual difficulties for the Maharal. But it is a beautiful read, and I think is one that makes a great theological and philosophical statement. Any questions or thoughts? You trying to say something?
Yeah, I have a question going back to Asav's original existential crisis.
Yeah.
We read at the end of Chayesara that Abraham departed. He's now got a new wife, a whole new family, 8 more children? Mm-hmm. And there's no evidence that he has any more contact really with Yitzchak.
Right.
And the twins haven't been born yet anyway. So, I mean, how involved was Abraham in their lives to cause Esav such, I don't know, angst?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's a really interesting question. We don't, and many people point that out, and they say that the Akedah is the last time that Yitzchak and Avraham speak to each other.
Right.
If we're going to take this midrash at faith, both the Gemara and the midrash we saw, so it's assuming that there was some involvement, seemingly some close involvement. And I don't know what the textual basis for that is, other than triggering this crisis of faith that we saw with Esav.
Well, it doesn't say anything about it in the text, but it's quite possible. But once there were grandchildren, Abraham decided to get involved with the family again.
That certainly is true, and I trust the grandparents on the call
that makes sense.
To identify more strongly with that than I do, but that certainly is possible that once they're grandkids, maybe Abraham got more involved. But it's a great question, Rina. I don't know.
Or maybe Yitzchak reached out to him at that point.
Yeah, I mean, we have
possible.
to.
It's
we
possible.
have to fill in all those blanks. We don't have those details.
And my other question.
Go ahead.
But I'm not sure why distance is an issue here. You see, distance, he could have had this idealized mythic picture of Abraham, and rather, if he'd been seeing him every day, he would have seen him age and lose his strength. But he had this idealized picture, and all of a sudden, he's gone.
Yeah, that's possible also.
And Yitzchak was passive, and Yitzchak and Rivka told stories of the saintly Abraham. And
right.
My other question is, and it turns up later, I guess, if Esav sold his birthright, and he knew he sold it. I mean, this didn't happen unconsciously.
Right.
Why did he freak out so much when the birthright was given to his brother? I mean, he sort of had to expect it.
Yeah, I mean, there's
unless he didn't think this agreement was binding,
so the conventional explanation is that Esav was someone who lived in the moment. So in the moment, he didn't think anything of it, and then so many years later, when he saw that it was a big deal, he realized what he had done, or he realized now in this moment it bothered him. That's the easiest explanation for it.
Okay.
Yeah, but it's good questions. Any other thoughts or reactions?
Okay.
All right. So have a good night, everybody. Have a good week.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll see each other again next time.
Everyone.
Bye, Lato.
Laila Tov. Shkoach.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rabbi.
Okay, did you get the source sheet, Arthur? Did you get the link?
No, I didn't print it.
But so do you want to download it before I shut down?
Yes. I couldn't figure out how to print it.
Printing, I can't help you with.
Well, I could see it, but at that time I couldn't print
Okay. If I have all the files. If you ever have a problem, just let me know. I'll send it
it.
to you.
Okay, very good.
Okay. I have a question for you. We're starting to give a little bit of thought to a shul. I'm going to stop recording.